Not much is likely to change with the rankings tonight. Top 6 teams, all won. Top 10 teams, all won. Sorry if that spoils the drama for you. But it really doesn't if you're willing to look a little bit deeper. Tonight, when the rankings come out, pay attention to who winds up a little farther down the list. There might be teams that have been forgotten that carry some weight with the committee. They've played some of the contenders. Find out where they are, and that could make a big difference come Selection Day. Take Syracuse, for instance. How high will the Orange rise? A date with Notre Dame on Saturday, and they've already pushed Clemson to the absolute limit. Then there are the teams who are lurking, like West Virginia. They keep winning and hoping, just needing that door to crack open ever so slightly. Might not take much. The clouds of drama are indeed building. You just have to know where to look for them.
Welcome to College Football Playoff Top 25, presented by Goodyear.
That committee room is hard at work. Grapevine, Texas. Now, look, they probably didn't have to do a lot of shuffling at the top because everybody at the top of the college football playoff rankings able to win last week. Top 10 teams did. You had to get all the way down to 11 before you found a loss, but a lot of things can be instructive tonight. Glad to have you with us. Reese Davis, Joey Galloway, David Pollack, and Jesse Palmer. So, Jesse, what are you looking forward to? Let's say, I think we know what the top 4 is going to look like in all likelihood, maybe even the top 6. What are you looking for beyond?
I'm looking to see if teams are moving here after the top 4. How about Ohio State right now at number 10? They just beat then number 18 Michigan State on the road. I think there is some question as to whether or not Ohio State's a team that's in control of its own destiny right now. Even if they beat Michigan and play Northwestern in the Big Ten title game, maybe Northwestern is ranked in that game, but Oklahoma and West Virginia, as of right now, are ranked ahead of Ohio State. They might have to play each other twice. They might. And if one of those teams wins that game twice, maybe that's enough to keep Oklahoma and West Virginia ranked ahead of Ohio State, even if they win.
You missed the show last week. That was a contentious debate about controlling their own destiny. Ohio State definitely doesn't control their own destiny. How about the teams that are in the mix, that are in the hunt down the stretch? Like, if you're talking about the 4 spot, like Mississippi State being in the bottom of the 25. How about Northwestern? Those are teams that are going to be resume builders for certain squads and how they look. So I think those people at the bottom of the 25 will matter when we start to reveal them.
Yeah, I think the top 5 is set. I want to see what the committee does with Oklahoma. Not sure they'll move this week, but if you watch this team, defense has been a bit of a struggle. Rankings and the numbers not so good.
I like how you put that, though.
But on the other side, though, the offense is off the charts good. So is there any movement in that 6 to 10 area? You mentioned Ohio State, West Virginia's in there. Washington State goes on the road and beats Colorado. So is there any movement in that Oklahoma area with a defense that is a bit of a struggle?
Yeah, Rob Mullen's going to join us in a little while. I'm going to ask him about that, about how the committee's looking at a team that is so good on one side and
a juxtaposition.
Everyone starts smiling when they say, yeah, the defense is.
You know, they're like 17 spots worse than any other team that's ranked in either the college football playoff rankings or the AP top 25 in terms of defensive efficiency.
Their statistics have actually gotten worse on defense since they fired Mike Stoops as defensive coordinator.
Yeah, Kirk Herbstreit is with us now. So, Kirk, outside of those teams at the top that we expect to remain the same, what are you curious to see tonight?
Oh, mercy. I'm curious.
Sell me, Kirk. Sell me. Let's go.
I am curious to see, my friends, what Washington State will do. Joseph Scott Galloway, he touched on it, and he talked about Oklahoma. You guys have all talked about Oklahoma's defense. I don't know if it's going to matter much with Oklahoma having an opportunity to play West Virginia, but I do want to see if Washington State, we keep waiting for, at least I keep waiting for them to coug it, and they're not. They're continuing to win. And so I want to see if they're rewarded, if they move up at all, get into that mix with those 2 Big 12 teams. In a perfect world for Washington State, Oklahoma would lose in Morgantown, and those 2 teams maybe play again, and Oklahoma ends up beating West Virginia. That would open up the door possibly for Washington State and Ohio State down the road if Ohio State were to win out.
You have some pretty significant games coming up this weekend in the Big 12 for sure. West Virginia going on the road to Stillwater to take on Oklahoma State. Texas and Iowa State still in the midst of it as well and trying to get into that Big 12 championship game. So remember, we don't see the rankings until you do, so let's go ahead and show you the top 25 tonight. We'll count them down. This week's college football rankings brought to you by Goodyear. and Boise State after coming back to beat Fresno State at 25. And Mississippi State really didn't fall that much despite the shutout loss.
And how about
to Alabama.
Utah State sitting there now at 23? That's a team that in the AP poll and coaches poll is a top 14 team. Boise State also a top 25 in both of those polls. So maybe a group of 5 contender for a New Year's Six bowl game if UCF were to lose now in the toughest stretch of their schedule.
And UCF will have an opportunity for its best win on Saturday if they can beat Cincinnati.
Yeah, UCF really excited to see Cincinnati jump into the top 24, sit at 9-1. Luke Fickell's done a terrific job making Cincinnati a real football team as UCF is going to look for ways to build a resume.
Herbie?
Hey guys, Northwestern up there in the top 22 with a chance to win their last couple games to get to 8-4 before they get to Indianapolis. Significant because they're only going to climb if they continue to win. And if Michigan gets into the crosshairs there, like we keep talking about, if a Georgia team ends up knocking off Alabama, that possibly could be big for whether it's Michigan or Ohio State if they have an opportunity to play a top 18, top 19 type of Northwestern team.
And Northwestern on its way to that Big Ten championship game, and now to avoid a stumble in one of their last 2 games so that they can stay in those rankings and perhaps, look, they're trying to win it, but from the other team's perspective, trying to get a top 25 win. Boston College stays at number 20. I mean, you know what? I think that's as it should be. You lose to a top team, or number 1 or number 2 is Boston College.
Starting quarterback goes out early.
Why would you drop? Now you could drop them because you don't think they're as good because the quarterback's not there anymore if you want to.
Utah getting back in, important for the Pac-12, important for Washington State, another team that we're talking about.
Yeah.
They're getting in. We don't know who's coming out of Pac-12 South. I mean, everybody's still
No,
in
but this is
Pac-12
good for
South.
Washington
But
State
definitely good for
because-
Washington State with Washington being in, and then they still got to play in the Pac-12 championship game. If they can win it, teams
And
get
keep
ranked.
your eye on Iowa State, guys. A team that's won 5 in a row. They've been a totally different team with Brock Purdy at quarterback. Of course, if they win out, they got a big one this weekend against Texas. David Montgomery won't play the first half of that game. But if they win out and West Virginia loses once, this is a team that's going to the Big 12 title game.
Now you have the tie break by virtue of the head-to-head victory against West Virginia. They would not hold that against Oklahoma. Conversely, Texas holds it against Oklahoma, but not against West Virginia. That's probably the most intriguing battle coming down the stretch in the Big 12.
Kentucky's still getting a lot of credit.
Kentucky
A lot of respect.
losing to Tennessee. Yeah, I thought they would fall further also.
Thumped by Tennessee.
Maybe
that
so.
wasn't
Yeah,
competitive.
2 straight losses, you only dropped down to 17.
Maybe so, but you start looking at everything else and try to stack them up.
Everyone else lost.
Now, Washington's got an opportunity here to win the Pac-12 still. They moved up 7 spots this week in the rankings there. The Longhorns sitting at number 15 at 7-3 with a great win against Oklahoma on the resume. And UCF still sitting at number 11. That's up 1 spot from 12. They move up with Kentucky falling behind them, and Syracuse, who has Notre Dame on Saturday, they are sitting there in the 12 spot now. And we're seeing a lot less ACC, a lot fewer ACC teams than we did last week in the rankings. So Florida's still sitting at 13 at 7-3. So let's look at the top 10 now, and Ohio State holding firm at number 10 despite that win on the road in East Lansing. Is not enough to move the Buckeyes up, and just ahead of them, West Virginia. That is just exact same as it was a week ago, just ahead of the Mountaineers at number 8.
So can we just
Nobody's moved.
keep scrolling?
Nobody's moved.
Now it's over.
Well, we could shuffle a little bit in the top 6.
Shut it
we'll
down,
see.
Reese. It's over.
But again, I think Washington State
LSU's number 7.
that's important. Washington State, because think about LSU. If you're starting to debate Washington State, listen, if chaos comes, Washington State, you could play Utah, who we just saw in the top 17 or top 20, and you could play Washington. You can play them in back-to-back weeks.
Back-to-back week could help them,
That's
right?
very, very important for Washington State. And here's the thing with Washington State. They've always been a great offensive team. They've always been able to score. They're playing pretty good defense.
Yeah, they are.
Cal, they don't lose a game against Cal when they score under 20 in the past. That usually doesn't happen because they give up so many points. Washington State's a pretty daggum good team.
Really good.
I want to watch them more because they're a team I think they can jump up in there.
They're going to need some help.
Oh, they're
And
definitely need help. There's no doubt.
Anything we're looking at now, these teams are going to need some help. Washington State would help themselves by blowing people out. Going on the road, beating Colorado the way they did is very impressive. So now at this stage, teams need to win impressively, because if we get down to the end, we're going to jump into conversations about, okay, somebody has to unseed somebody to move up. And so you have to look impressive doing it, but I don't know that Washington State has enough left to get there.
You know what? This is the odd thing, I think, Joey, is that all of these teams, they want a lot of chaos at the top. But the one thing that teams like that probably don't want they probably want Alabama and Clemson just to go ahead and win.
For sure.
I mean, that way they'll
Clear it out.
concede those 2 spots and then let them help them clear out the
You
ones.
concede Michigan also, though. I mean, with Ohio State sitting behind, Michigan, if Ohio State beats Michigan, then you open up a door for another conversation of can these teams,
Yeah.
can
Yeah, no, I
Washington
was
State
ta-
hold off on Ohio State?
Right, I was talking more along the lines of a Washington State, a West Virginia. If they want to try
Oklahoma.
Oklahoma,
Yes.
maybe even a little bit. Maybe they just need those 2 spots to be filled.
They
Let
need
them knock
Alabama
out a
to win
couple
out
of
for
other
sure.
teams.
They
And
need
Clemson,
Alabama to
too,
win out
would
for
help. Herbie, what's your reaction right there? Not much change right there, particularly in the top 10.
Yeah, I continue to look at LSU, and you know, you could debate whether or not they're deserving of their spot. I just wonder how it potentially plays out. Has LSU hit a ceiling? Like, is there anything that they have left that the committee's going to say, oh yeah, hey, LSU's going to continue to move up, or will teams eventually have the opportunity to go by them? So LSU, to me, it's almost like they're in the middle of that. If you get them, if you look at the teams behind them that still are potentially thinking of a conference championship, you just wonder where that ceiling is, and if that is the ceiling for LSU, or could they possibly move up with? I know they have A&M at the end of the year. Who else do they have left?
They've got
a
Rice this
non-conference
week.
game.
They've got
this-
Rice.
Yeah, Rice won't
Yeah,
give them a
so-
bump.
Yeah.
No.
You know, no, I just wonder if that's pretty much LSU's kind of just holding a spot, and eventually teams
They are.
potentially, if they win, will
Yeah.
go right by them. That's, you would think that's kind of the
And I
way
think,
it'll
I
play
think
out.
the committee is also looking to see whether these teams are improving. I think LSU playing against an Arkansas team that hadn't won a conference game yet and winning by 7 points, albeit on the road, wasn't overly impressive. I think you could say the same thing about Ohio State. I'm still waiting to see them put a total, complete game together. Their defense finally looked really, really good against Michigan State, against a very banged-up Michigan State offense that gave the game away.
That doesn't do anything that gives
No,
them fits. It doesn't
no.
do the RPO.
And Ohio
It's
State's
really a
offense-
14-point win
Yeah.
for LSU. They start from scoring. I was wondering the same
That
thing. I was
that
thinking,
upsets some
what if-
people,
I wonder if the
apparently.
committee is sitting there saying, okay, they took a knee before they went in, and we'll count that as 17. We'll give them the 7.
Against Arkansas, it shouldn't matter.
Against the Arkansas
It shouldn't
team.
matter.
No,
But
but I
that
agree,
shouldn't matter.
they're
Look.
sort of floating there, sort of in the way, but I don't think they'll stay in the way if, say, a West Virginia wins out or Oklahoma
I agree.
wins out. They'll get out.
Washington
It's a,
State's
it's,
too.
a
Put them in
perfect
there, too.
it's a perfect example, though, of the committee doing exactly what it says it does. They evaluate it up to right now without any peeking forward. That's an example, but peeking forward, I think we all can sit here and look and say, teams are going to pass LSU if they still have one
And-
loss.
and
Let's look at the top 6 right quick here. And I think
Onward,
this is what we're
onward
gonna
we go.
expect.
Onward.
Number 1,
Bama.
Alabama. Number 2 is
Alabama.
going to be Clemson.
Hey,
Just
surprise.
behind. You know, the one thing I want to hear from Mullins is there a big gap between Alabama and Clemson, and then how does that compare to the gap between Clemson and number 3?
And guess what? He's not going to answer you that question.
But I'm asking him. If he's watching right now, he's getting fair warning to formulate a really nice answer on it to tell the truth. He's laughing right now, I'm told. And just behind Notre Dame is Michigan. Now, Notre Dame, Michigan, one could argue, is playing better football than Notre Dame right now, but Notre Dame's still getting credit for that perfect record and the head-to-head victory against the Wolverines. Georgia's number 5, and I'm not implying that Notre Dame's not playing well. I'm just saying I think Michigan's playing really well, and Oklahoma is number 6. So we have it just exactly as we did last week. Just a few takeaways from this. First time in the history of the college football playoff rankings that the top 10 remains exactly the same. Alabama has been number 1 for more than half of the rankings. UCF at number 11. Now, I know that's not where they want to be. That is the highest ranked group of 5 team in the college football playoff era. So they are, despite the fact that their schedule right now, strength of schedule is 118, they're getting credit for having won 22 in a row and now the lowest ranked team to make the college football playoff at this point in the season. Michigan State did it from the 9-hole in 2015. Of course, they were able to ride a big upset on the road of Ohio State that year to get into the playoffs. So, Kirk, not much changed. Anything that you look at right there you would take exception with, or something that you could forecast a little bit based on that top 6?
No, not really. I mean, what we're looking at right there is what all of us kind of speculated and thought. You made an interesting point when you said that you could make a case for Michigan currently playing better week in and week out than Notre Dame. I thought Notre Dame is the one team of all the teams that is not only playing against their opponent, they're playing against themselves and against perfection, as far as Lee Corso likes to say, because they haven't had that marquee opponent outside of Michigan. They have big name brands, but unfortunately, many of those teams are down this year, including USC, who's hanging on at the end of the year. So I think with Notre Dame, maybe not this week necessarily because Syracuse has a higher ranking, so the perception is that that would be a better opponent. But I think that they need a strong statement at the end just to solidify themselves in case there is any potential nasty, messy stuff on the last weekend. Of course, we're talking about Georgia possibly upsetting Alabama. They want to make sure that they're safe and in the clubhouse. So, but I'm with you. Michigan is a team that's trending as well as anybody. And for us, it's all going to come down to the 24th when they head to Columbus and see if they can get through beating Ohio State.
You know, we talk a lot about schedules, and scheduling involves a little bit of luck. And Kirk alluded to Notre Dame's luck or lack thereof with their schedule. What kind of world are we living in when the Notre Dame starting quarterback gets hurt right before the Florida State game? And the only thing the Irish fans are concerned about, will he be ready for Syracuse?
Hope he gets back.
I mean, you know, but Florida State, I got that one.
Yeah.
Florida State. And instead they're worried about Syracuse. It really underscores how Notre Dame looked like a brutal schedule, and it's turned out now you're struggling outside of Michigan to find a big-time win, but an opportunity.
Well, and I think it's a compliment to Notre Dame because there's a lot of programs in the country that if their starting quarterback goes down, they could struggle. And you could say what you want to say about Florida State, too. The one thing they did have, though, was a very athletic, disruptive defensive line that gives a lot of different people fits. How about Notre Dame's offensive line in that game, guys? They've been beat up all year, arguably had their best game of the season with the backup quarterback in. Didn't give up a sack. They ran for 365 yards. I would say you could come away from that Notre Dame win against Florida State and maybe be even more impressed with them as a football team.
Can we go back to Northwestern was in the top 25. They took care of Northwestern easily as well. I mean, easily. You go look at the box score and you want to start pointing to special teams and some crap that happened late. It was a dominating performance. So I get that we're going to do the comparison game with Michigan's playing like this right now and Notre Dame's playing like this right now. Notre Dame's playing really good football. And if you start to look at their roster, offensive and defensively, where's your holes? There's not big holes that you can point to that they don't do this well. They do everything really well. They might not do everything great, but they don't have a weakness that you can just poke at and say, they don't do this well, I'm going to exploit.
I think we'll find out this week, though. When you look at Notre Dame's schedule, the Michigan offense sort of sets up for Notre Dame and what they do. The Stanford offense, same thing. So this week, when they go against Syracuse, they'll find a offense that passes the football and throws it around. And I always say, we don't really know what these teams' weaknesses are until they find a team that can exploit a weakness. And so we don't know. They might not be great on the back end. We'll find out against a Syracuse team with Eric Dungy and Dino Babers, who's going to throw the ball around some. So we'll find out what Notre Dame is on the back end. And in this same conversation, Stanford is another team who's usually a pretty good football team. But now they're a team that is kind of they're down, so they're hurting a Washington State. They're hurting a Notre Dame because they're not where they are. And we look at these schedules, and it's like, man, some of these teams that are always good teams are now doing nothing for the teams that beat them.
Here's the reality with Notre Dame, too, though. It could happen. I don't think it's going to, but they could have beaten the Big Ten and ACC champion by the end of the year if Northwestern wins. If Pitt goes to the ACC title game, just saying, not likely, but their schedule might not look so bad at the end of the year.
I don't think it's bad. It's just not. It's just not
what we thought it was going
to be. I think it's still a very representative schedule, Kirk.
There he is.
I would say I want to agree with Jesse and David about Notre Dame. The one thing you have to say when you're looking in the latter part of the season is what kind of defensive line do you have? And Notre Dame has an excellent defensive line. And Joey, about their secondary, they might be able to get away with not having superior secondary play because they're so good up front and they can get pressure with four. So if you look at that, you look at Ian Book, assuming he's healthy and he's able to come back, Dexter Williams, Boykin on the outside, Claypool, the tight ends, the offensive line playing well. If you compare this Notre Dame team to where they were in 12 when they played Alabama, when it was more about it was almost like they had the luck of the Irish that year when they ended up getting to the championship. This feels, I think we can all agree, very, very different, especially with Ian Book coming in there to give them more of a balanced attack, more of a sense of urgency on offense, and the execution's at a very, very high level. So you combine Book and Williams and all of that, along with the defensive front. I don't know. It feels like this Notre Dame team, despite not having those marquee wins, they are doing a great job at taking care of business.
Yeah, don't misunderstand what I was saying. If they win, they're going to the playoff. And if they were to stumble Saturday and then still beat USC, I still think that they merit consideration by virtue of the way they've played all year and the fact that they beat Michigan.
You're saying
it doesn't have to be.
If they
it doesn't have to,
stumble, they still
losing. I'm not saying they will or even that they should, but I don't think they should be eliminated. That's not
I
an
don't think they'll
elimination.
be eliminated. But
a lot of people do. But I don't agree with
if
that. Shouldn't
Oklahoma
be that
wins
way.
out, if Michigan wins out, then I do believe that Notre Dame is eliminated if they lose.
You still would have, in that case, a head-to-head victory by Notre Dame over Michigan. I
With
agree.
their
That has to
backup, with
count.
their backup quarterback.
I agree with that, but
Maybe,
you also
but
got to
they
look
might
at the
have
way
won
they're
because
playing
of
now.
And without
You
their
mentioned
best-
it.
I agree.
No one's playing much better football
Yeah,
than
Mr.
Michigan
Williams,
right
that's
now.
right. Yeah.
So I think you also have to look at that.
Okay, we're going to talk about what would be the biggest headache for the committee right now. Alabama,
Please.
Clemson, Notre
Please
Dame,
bring
Michigan.
it.
Which of the top four losing would be the biggest problem or create the most controversy? And Rob Mullins, he's frowning now. I'm told he was laughing earlier listening to us. We'll get Rob all straightened out here and find
Come
out
on,
what
Robbie.
the big gaps
Let's
are
go, Robbie.
coming up when the committee chair joins us live.
College Football Playoff Top 25 is presented by Goodyear. Hardworking tires that deliver blimp-worthy performance.
You had 3 undefeated teams make the playoff in the college football playoff era, and we've got 3 sitting at the top that just keep holding serve. Alabama, Clemson, Notre Dame, followed by the one-loss teams of Michigan, Georgia, and Oklahoma. Of course, Georgia and Alabama already set to play in the SEC championship game on Championship Saturday. Joined now by the chairman of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, Rob Mullins. Rob, let's start at the top. It's been a foregone conclusion Alabama Clemson is going to be 1-2. How would you describe the gap in the room from the voting, the listing measures, and the ranking measures, the gap between number 1 and number 2 right now?
Well, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of conversation around both those teams. And when you look at them at this point, they're complete teams. They're very strong on offense and very strong on defense. And as you look at the last couple of weeks, Alabama with 2 consecutive shutouts, which certainly impressed the committee. When you add that to their efficient offense, and then you look at Clemson and how their defense played on the road at Boston College last weekend, the only score was a special team score. So, still 1-2 at this point through week 11.
Is there a gap between 1 and 2? Is Clemson pushed to overtake 1?
Again, we spend a lot of time talking about it. I don't know that we put a definition around the gap, but when you load up the metrics, they're both top 10 offense, top 10 defense. But at this point, everybody has Alabama 1 and Clemson 2.
Okay, so behind that now, is there a bigger gap and a more significant one between those 2 teams and the other teams in the top 5 or 6?
Well, I don't know that we put a measurement on the gap. When we go through the voting processes, we do them in the 3 categories by threes. When you look at Notre Dame, again, we see a team that took care of business this week with a backup quarterback and a strong defense. And then Michigan's had 2 consecutive weeks of winning 42-7 with the number 1 defense in the country and an offense that continues to improve. And then you look at Georgia the last 3 weeks with what they've been able to do after losing to LSU. Again, we see a strong defense, and an offense that's led by Jake Fromm that continues to make progress.
What you haven't seen is a strong defense from Oklahoma. You see a championship-level offense, it would appear, but the defense has struggled. It was a couple of years ago that a former committee member said that was a thing the committee couldn't get past. And they didn't feel like Oklahoma had a championship-level defense at that time, and it kind of kept them out of consideration. How would you describe the way Oklahoma's evaluated as it pertains to the way they're playing defense right now?
Obviously, we're very aware that they have one of the most dynamic offenses in the country, a great quarterback, lots of great skill position players. But we're very aware that they're having defensive struggles, that continues to be a deficiency and something that goes into the evaluation.
When you look at teams sitting behind LSU, and LSU is the 2-loss team that's sitting there ahead of some of the 1-loss teams, how much weight do you anticipate the evaluation process will take winning rivalry games, winning championship games potentially, as teams like Ohio State, teams like West Virginia, Washington State, Oklahoma, all will have the opportunity to do?
Well, as you know, we don't project, of course. We're only dealing with the results through week 11. And when you look at those teams, you see, some really good teams. Washington State, West Virginia, somewhat similar. Great quarterbacks who are leading offenses and improved defenses, and they're just finding a way to win games. And then Ohio State, again, is finding a way to win games. When you look at what Ohio State did last week, the combination of special teams and defense and how they kept Michigan State pinned in to find a way to win, that's why those teams are 8, 9, and 10 right now.
How is the committee looking at UCF as it pertains to whether they're in the evaluation process with some of the upper echelon teams? Let me put it to you this way, Rob. How many listing steps does it take before UCF gets on the board?
Well, they've been 12, and now they're up to 11 this week. Very powerful offense, very aware of what their quarterback can do. But in the room, you can't avoid the fact that a strength of schedule is an issue when you start to line them up with some of these other teams. So that is a part of the conversation.
All right, Rob, always a pleasure. Rob Mullins, the chairman of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. And for those, look, I know it's a little bit confusing, but quickly, how they do the listing and the ranking steps is if we were committee members, we would all write down 6 teams. Whoever gets the most votes among those would then be put in to be ranked. You list them in any order you want, then they're ranked. Top 3 stay, next 3 go into the next pool. So that's what I was getting at about how far down the line you get for UCF.
Educate him, Reese.
Yeah, I probably needed a whiteboard to explain all of that. Anything that Rob said stick out to you?
No, he didn't say much at all.
Oh, come on, man. What do you want him to say?
No, I'm saying he didn't say much. There is not much to say. The top 10 hasn't changed. And I'm not saying that you're a terrible interviewer, and I'm not saying that he didn't.
No, because I'm the best.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just saying there wasn't much to say. But interesting, though. You asked about Oklahoma's defense. First thing you addressed was Oklahoma's offense. And that's the same thing we have done when we've talked about this team is their offense first. Other than that, I don't know that he addressed any one of the gaps. And that's the question we're wondering in that top 5 teams.
I think
where's your gap?
I think he, if you listen closely, I think he admitted there's a gap between 2 and the rest.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a gap.
Yeah, well, I'm saying when you asked about gap 1, 2, we didn't address it. And then you said the gap between the 3 and the 4 and the 5. That gap.
But I think he said. Didn't he say that Alabama was number 1 all the way through
for
everybody?
For sure.
By the way, he's given us more information than anybody's ever done this before. He does a really good job of telling us what they're thinking.
Yeah.
And listen, I think the most interesting part about it is the Washington State, Oklahoma, West Virginia. Because I think you could look at Oklahoma's defense consistently, and you could start making a case for those other teams behind them. I think you could start to do that. They're not, and they left it exactly the same. And what he just said was he considers them similar. He considers West Virginia, Washington State, Oklahoma very similar. Obviously, Oklahoma has a more dynamic offense, but I wonder if that shifts at all at some point when you start to look at a couple of those other defenses are playing a lot better than Oklahoma.
I think the difference is obviously, all Oklahoma ever has to do, though, is just score 1 more point than their opponent to keep winning, right? And the saving grace for Oklahoma is that statistically, this is historically one of the greatest offenses in college football history, guys.
Do we say this every year?
Kyler Murray is playing better than Baker Mayfield did a year ago from an efficiency standpoint, off the charts. They've had 300 passing and rushing yards in the same game 3 straight games. And we talk about all the skill players they've got. Their offensive line is dominating people. It's just ridiculous what this offense is able to do right now. So I think that's the saving grace. Now, you can't say Oklahoma is as complete a team right now, I think, as you could say West Virginia or Washington State, but because of this offense and just the nature of the scoreboard, until anybody can find a way to stop these guys, this is a team that's just going to keep winning.
Do we start looking at this now instead of looking at the teams now and trying to figure out, because we watch so much, we kind of get inundated with all these stats. At what point do we start going, who's going to give Alabama the best game? I think that at some point is going to enter our thought process.
The answer is nobody.
It may be. Well,
that's not true. I think there are better choices that will give.
It may be
I think it will.
us.
I think it will come into play because that's the best team. The best team is the one that's going to show up and give the best fight the most consistently in the playoffs. And that to me is going to be very interesting because I think there's a couple teams. Like if Michigan plays Alabama,
But
It's a very bad.
But it's
I
not
would
about the best
disagree.
matchups. It's about the best 4 teams.
Right. I would
gotcha.
disagree with you vehemently that
I gotcha.
that should not be part of
But
the
it will be.
evaluation.
At some point, I
it
think
can
it'll
be
be
part
started
of what
thinking.
we would talk
Yeah.
about, but it should not enter in the room.
Yeah, I don't think it's about giving
I don't
viewers
think
at
it's in the
home the
room.
best
I
game.
thought
It's
he
not
was
the
saying,
viewers.
I thought he
It's
was
the team
saying
that-
amongst us.
Yeah, amongst us.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's the team. That's what we have to start talking about because I think it's going to be part of the. It's going to be part of the dialogue.
I don't think it's going to be in that room. It shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be.
That's
Definitely
not the
not.
way.
It
That's
should be
not
the
way you
foremost
evaluate.
deserving four
But just like Ohio State
team.
not going last year or in the past, like
Because they lost by 1,000.
yes, because they knew they wouldn't show up consistently. Who will show up consistently? That's part of being the best team is being the most consistent team.
Understood, but I think it was more about what they did or didn't do
Didn't do.
against Iowa,
Rhode
and then the
Island.
game
Didn't show up.
against
Think
Oklahoma.
locker rooms, man. They'll get you.
Got to be careful. Go out there, walk out there. Hey,
Fix
you
the
know,
new
only
black.
one top 10 team plays a ranked opponent. Coaches don't want to look ahead, but there are some issues to address. Just ask Harbaugh.
It's cold and flu season. Get your flu shots.